Mr. Smale, the grocer's shop, to get some things for Mother. There was someone else just being served, so while she waited, she looked from the doorway at Billy Blunt, who was spinning a wooden top on the pavement opposite, outside his father's corn shop. Presently some boys came along the road. As they passed Billy Blunt, one of the boys kicked his top into the gutter, and another pulled his cap off and threw it on the ground. And then they went on down the road, laughing and shouting to one another. Billy Blunt looked annoyed, but he only picked up his cap and dusted it and put it on again, and picked up his top and wiped it, and went on spinning. And just then Mr. Smale, the grocer, said, "Well, young lady, and what can I do for you this morning?" So Milly-Molly-Mandy had to come away from the door and be served. Milly-Molly-Mandy had seen the boys before. They didn't belong to the village, but had come to stay nearby, and they were always about and always seemed to be making a lot of noise. Well, Milly-Molly-Mandy got the things Mother wanted, a tin of cocoa and a tin of mustard and some root ginger for making rhubarb and ginger jam, and then she left the shop to go across and speak to Billy Blunt. But as she stepped over the step, the boys were coming back again, up her side of the road this time, and they bumped into her so that the basket of groceries was knocked out of her hand. The tins came clattering out, and the paper of root ginger burst all over the pavement, and instead of saying sorry, the boys only grinned broadly and went on their way, turning back to look at her now and then. Billy Blunt came across the road to help. "Billy," said Milly-Molly-Mandy, "I believe they meant to do that. They bumped into me on purpose." Billy Blunt said, "Lot of donkeys," and began picking up bits of ginger. "What did they want to do it for?" said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "And pull your cap off too." Billy Blunt only grunted and picked up more bits of ginger. Mr. Smale, the grocer, came to his door to see what was going on, and said, "Them stupid young things knocked your basket, did they? Tell your mother to give that ginger a rinse in cold water, and it'll be all right. Out to make nuisances of themselves, they are. They've got something to learn, stupid young things." Miss Muggins's niece Jilly came running over. She'd been watching from Miss Muggins's draper's shop opposite. "They're a gang, they are," she told Milly-Molly-Mandy and Billy Blunt. "They try to knock people's hats off and make them drop things all the time. They've got a leader, and they're a gang." "They're donkeys," said Billy Blunt, and he went back to his own side of the pavement, winding up his top as he went. Milly-Molly-Mandy said thank you to him and started off home with her basket, and Miss Muggins's Jilly went with her a little way, talking about the gang and the naughty things they did. "They're silly," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "I shouldn't take any notice of them." "Oh, I don't," said Miss Muggins's Jilly, and she went right on talking about them till they came to the duck pond. There they parted, and Milly-Molly-Mandy went on up the road to the nice white cottage with the thatched roof, where Mother was waiting for her groceries. She washed the ginger, and it was quite all right. The next morning, little friend Susan came round to see if Milly-Molly-Mandy was coming out to play. Milly-Molly-Mandy was just helping Mother to clean the big preserving pan that the rhubarb and ginger jam had been cooked in. So Mother gave little friend Susan a spoon so that she could help to clean it too. And when the pan was as clean as they could make it with their 2 spoons, they washed their sticky hands and faces, and then Mother gave them a big slice of bread and jam each to take out into the fields to eat. So they went over the road and climbed the stile and strolled along the field path, eating and talking and enjoying themselves very much. And they were just turning down the lane leading to the forge, which is always a nice way to go if you're not going anywhere special, when little friend Susan said, "Look at those boys. What are they doing?" Milly-Molly-Mandy looked, licking jam off her fingers, and she saw they were the boys whom Miss Muggins's Jilly called the gang. They were peeping around the hedge by the next stile. "They're waiting to knock our hats off, only we haven't got any on," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "Hadn't we better go back?" said little friend Susan. "No," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "They're just silly, and that's what they are. I'm going on." So they went on and climbed over the stile, Milly-Molly-Mandy first and then little friend Susan. And just as she had got over, one of the boys jumped out of the hedge and knocked her piece of bread and jam, only a very small piece now, out of little friend Susan's hand into the dirt and ran behind the hedge again. Little friend Susan didn't like having her last piece of bread and jam spoiled, but Milly-Molly-Mandy even more didn't like seeing who the boy was who did it. "It's Timmy Biggs," she said. "You know, that boy who won the race at the fete and Billy Blunt used to practice with. Why did he want to do that?" Little friend Susan was looking at her bread and jam. "I can't eat this now," she said. "I'll take it to the ducks, because of course you never waste bread." So Milly-Molly-Mandy just called out, "You're silly, Timmy Biggs," at the hedge, and they went on past the forge and down to the duck pond. The blacksmith wasn't hammering or doing anything interesting, so they didn't stop to watch. Billy Blunt was in his garden by the corn shop, busy with the lock of the old cycle shed which stood in one corner. He saw them coming down the back lane, and as they didn't pass the garden fence, he knew they must have turned the other way. So presently he wandered out and found them by the duck pond. There were 5 ducks quacking and paddling in the water, and little friend Susan was tearing her bread into as many bits as she could, but it didn't go very far. "Hello, Billy," said Milly-Molly-Mandy as soon as he came near. "What do you think? Timmy Biggs has gone and joined that gang. He knocked Susan's bread and jam into the dirt." "I saw him with them," said Billy Blunt. "We ought to do something," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. Said Billy Blunt. "Knock their caps off and see how they like it," said little friend Susan. "I don't see why we have to be silly just because they are," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "I don't want to be in their sort of gang." "Might start a gang of our own," said Billy Blunt. "Oh, yes," said Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan excitedly together. So then they had to hold each other's little finger and think of a poet's name before they did anything else. "Robert Burns," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "Shakespeare," said little friend Susan. Then they set to work to think what they could do in their gang. "It must be quite different from that other one," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "They knock things down, so we pick things up. And they leave field gates open, so we close them," said little friend Susan. "And we could have private meetings in our old cycle shed," said Billy Blunt. "It's got a lock and key." That was a splendid idea, and the new gang got busy right away, clearing dust and spiders out of the cycle shed. There were no bicycles kept there now. And while they were in the middle of it, sweeping the floor with the garden broom, scraping the corners out with the garden trowel, and rubbing the tiny windows with handfuls of grass, suddenly they heard shouting and footsteps running, and through the fence they saw boys tearing down the road from Mrs. Jake's, the postman's wife's gate. "Come on," said Billy Blunt to his gang, and they all ran out to see what had happened. Mrs. Jake's was in her front yard, flapping her hands with annoyance, her clean washing lying all along the ground. "Oh," she cried, "those boys, they untied the end of my clothesline, and now look at it." There they are, running down the road to see what had happened. Billy Blunt picked up the end of the rope, and they all tried to lift the clothesline to tie it up again, but it was too heavy with all the washing on it, so Mrs. Jakes told them to unpeg the clothes and take them carefully off the ground so as not to dirty them any more. The grass was clean and the things were nearly dry, so they weren't much hurt. Only 1 or 2 tea cloths needed to be rinsed where they had touched against the fence. The new gang collected the pegs into a basket and helped Mrs. Jakes carry the washing into her kitchen, and she was very grateful for their help. "It's not near so bad as I thought when I first saw that line come down," she said. "Do you 3 like gooseberries?" She gave them a handful each, and they went back to the cycle shed and held a private meeting at once. The next day, Miss Muggins Jilly found out about the new gang and asked if she could join. She wanted to so much that they let her, and they made up some rules, such as not telling secrets of their private meetings, or where the key of the cycle shed was hidden, and about being always on the lookout to pick things up and mend things and shut gates, and about being faithful to the rules of the gang and that sort of thing. Well, they were kept quite busy in one way and another. They helped Mrs. Critch, the thatcher's wife, to collect her chickens when they were all let loose into the road, and they kept an eye on the field gates, that cows and sheep didn't get a chance of straying, and they rescued hats and caps and things belonging to other children when they were knocked off unexpectedly, and whenever there was anything important to discuss, or if any of their gang had anything given to them, such as apples, they would go along to the cycle shed and call a private meeting. They liked those meetings. One day, when they had been having a meeting, they saw Timmy Biggs hanging about by the Blunts' fence, alone. And when Billy Blunt purposefully wandered over that way, Timmy Biggs said to him, "I say, I suppose you wouldn't let me join your gang. I don't like that other one. I'd rather join yours. Could I?" Billy Blunt told him he'd have to think about it and ask the others. So he did, and they agreed to let Timmy Biggs join if he promised to keep the rules. So he joined, and they started a rounders team on the waste ground near the school. Then two of the boys took to hanging around watching as if they wanted to join in, and presently they spoke to Billy Blunt. "We don't like our gang much. We're tired of it," they said. It was his idea, and they pointed at the third boy who was sauntering by himself down the lane. He had been their gang leader. With 7 of them, now they could play rounders splendidly with Billy Blunt's bat and Milly-Molly-Mandy and Miss Muggins' Jilly taking turns to lend their balls. The cycle shed was too small now to hold their meetings, so they used it as a place to put the gang's belongings in, or to write important notices. Not long after, just as the whole gang was going to begin a game, Milly-Molly-Mandy and Billy Blunt and little friend Susan began whispering together and glancing at where the once leader of the other gang was sitting under a tree, watching them, but pretending not to, because he had nothing much else to do. When they had finished whispering, Billy Blunt walked over to the tree. "If you want to join in, come on," he said. "Well, I don't mind," said the boy, and he got up quite quickly. They had a grand game with so many players, and they worked up a very fine team indeed. And do you know, when a few weeks later the time came for those 3 visiting boys to leave the village and go back home, nobody felt so very pleased to see them go. And Milly-Molly-Mandy and Billy Blunt and little friend Susan and Miss Muggins' Jilly and Timmy Biggs would have been quite sorry, only that now they could just manage to squeeze into the cycle shed to have their private meetings again. The end. So how you treat somebody else can change the way they are towards you.